What's up? I'm Alex the Entrepreneur, and today I'm sharing with you the experience I had of migrating an application from Alpha 26 to Beta 16. And I'm just gonna share my experience, give you a bunch of pointers, hopefully save you a lot of time in doing the migration. So the first thing that I have to mention is that you will inevitably have to look at the documentation. And so in this video, I'm just gonna briefly go over the documentation real quick, and you will have to use the documentation anyway, so you're not gonna be able to avoid that. However, with this video, I'm gonna be able to get you up to speed with the main differences between the two versions and a bunch of gotchas that I experienced in upgrading them. So the first thing we'll do is we're just gonna go here, and to get the guides, you just go down here and then you click on migrate from Alpha 26 to Beta. And this stuff is very straightforward. Just install the newest version, clean up your modules. A bunch of stuff will be gone. I'm going to mention that later. But basically, you're going to also need to rewrite your scripts. You're going to need to delete a bunch of files. You're going to need to, for example, the server.js will be deleted. You can update your git ignore. There's a bunch of stuff. So this is something that you are going to have to look at. There's no way to avoid it. But the beauty of this new version is that in a way it streamlines everything. So that's what I'm actually going to be mentioning. So all of this stuff I'm going to touch on, but just know that you're going to have to look at this doc. There's no way to avoid that. So let's get started with my experience. So real quick intro, personal experience, main difference, and gotcha. So the folder structure that we used to have in Strapi Alpha had an admin panel up here, and then you would have the plugins folder, and then you would have your normal folders, which are the API, config, and public. And you also have the server.js, which is gone. Server.js is gone, the admin panel folder is gone, the plugins are gone. And instead, our beta version will use what is called the extensions system that is based on a folder called extensions, which I'm gonna talk about in depth here, and I also have another video in which I truly cover that as much as possible. So at the end of the day, all the files you're gonna have are in these three folders: the API, the config, and the extensions folder. Specifically, we're gonna have way less stuff. The plugins folder will be replaced by the extensions system or the extension folder, and the main difference will be that you're gonna only have to specify controllers, services, and routes for which you actually have changed something. So your default controllers and services will come automatically by Strapi. Actually, the admin folder is still used, but it's only used in the context of extending it. You can check out this doc on customizing the admin panel if you need more information on it. The only change you're going to have to apply to your routes.json from previously you would have a handler called destroy. The new handler is called delete. It comes from a place of streamlining. All services and controllers have been streamlined. They now have names that kind of make more sense. So you have the find and find one, which replace the fetch and the fetch all and the fetch. And then the other ones, I think they were called edit and create. I think is still create, but it used to be edit for the update, and now it's called update. And the delete used to be called destroy, and now it's called delete. So now these names are also going to be common between controllers and services, which means that you're not going to have to remember different names between controllers and services. Additionally, all of your core controllers are already going to be defined by default, so you don't have to even build them. Like, the only controllers and services you're going to need are the ones that you want to extend. Specifically, so if I open up an example of working here, you'll see that my service, for example, my default service folder for the beta version will have a module that exports with nothing. That's because I haven't upgraded the default services. On the other end, if I want to specify a different controller, then I can use either a new name, or I could just override the, for example, the find or whatever. Okay, and any custom controller you'll be able to define by using the routes JSON, which is still the same. It basically is the only file that hasn't changed. And going back to where we were, basically you're gonna have to write way less, but that also means that every controller and service that you actually wrote from your alpha version that is customized, you're going to need to migrate. And I want you to go in the core controllers and core services, especially the core controllers where you have the sanitized entity, to make sure that in your workflow you actually sanitize your data. Then we have our extension system. The extension system basically makes it so that instead of having to specify every file from your plugins and basically having your plugins in a folder, you can just specify the name of your plugin, in this case content-manager, and then you can specify the name of the file, such as controllers, and then the name of the file that you want to override called content manager, and you're going to basically be able to add functionality, or you're going to be able to override a method. So whenever you use a name of a controller that is already in the plugin, you're going to literally be overriding it. On the other hand, if you're going to add a different name for a controller or a service, it's simply going to be added to the list. The same goes for the routes. And I think you're gonna, on every fresh install, you will see the extensions folder anyway. And the reason why is because the JWT secret is stored there. So you will always have your user permission config JWT by default. And instead, if you want to customize even the routes, you can do what I did here, where I simply added an extra route and I even added a policy to it. So that's a great use case. And an example I can give you would be to create a custom delete controller for the content manager. This is actually related to a video. I'll make a card on the YouTube video. But basically, we had a question from my student where he asked me how to call a callback whenever you delete a content type, so that you can clean up the images from the database. And we can do that this way. We can create in our extensions folder a subfolder called content-manager, and then controllers, and then content-manager.js, and then we can just write our custom delete method where we check the ID and the model, and then we do something about it. The same thing we can do for the custom update controller. This is something that I had to migrate from an alpha version to a beta version, and basically we had this update method which we needed to use, and I had to also check whether the user was an admin. So if you'll notice that if you look at the ctx.state.user, while using your admin user, you're basically going to have a hard time fetching them. So down here I have a service for fetch. That's because the ctx.state.user for the admin cannot be fetched through this service. So I basically had to create this alternative way to figure out whether I'm in the admin, which is basically to check that the route that is an internal Strapi tool, basically checking that the original URL from the request comes from the content manager, which only an admin user will be able to do. So that's how I was able to do that. But at the end of the day, I'm simply using the extension system to specify a custom functionality that I want. The plugin core methods are still the old one. That's something that you want to keep in mind. So in this case, you actually saw update, while if I'm not mistaken, the new name will be edit. No, it's still update in the case of update. But for example, down here you see that services.users.fetch. We see that we still use fetch for the users, even though every other API, or rather a non-plugin API, will use a find or a find one. So the find and find one for the user plugins are still the fetch and fetch all. And now are some gotchas. Basically, if all you had to do was basically rename your remove to delete, which is literally the first thing that you want to try when you're upgrading from alpha to beta, you basically are a lucky man. Most likely the code will break. In my experience, there's a couple of reasons why that happens. Sometimes it has to do with needing to upgrade the plugins or finding a combination that actually works. Other time it simply has to do with the fact that some of the roles and permissions have changed, and as such they basically will return an undefined value on Strapi initialization, and as such they will throw an exception. And the exception, I unfortunately don't remember it, but the exception will be something of trying to destructure property of undefined or null, and it happens because Strapi will try and iterate over all the permission keys on the roles and permission, and it will try and get some roles and permission that you may have deleted, especially if you delete the remove endpoint, because now it's renamed to delete. And so you may have to either manually migrate your roles and permissions. So you literally go in your database, you copy the roles and permission folder, and then you upload it again. Or you may have to run your database, your production database, on a local version of Strapi in your local install, so that you can log out and figure out why it froze and why it doesn't work. And most likely you'll find that there's a couple of entries in your roles and permission tables that you basically have to delete manually. That's something you're going to have to do. Some other gotchas is the fact that if you have JSON files or JavaScript files in your API folder, they will be imported through the API setup process, because it's a very the code they wrote to import the process is something like, if it's not in the API, import it somewhere. If it's in the API, import it somewhere else. So basically, if you have some custom functionality such as sending emails in your /API folder, which is basically you have more than one file beside the service file, you're gonna have to migrate all of those files outside of the API folder. So that's something else to keep in mind. Smaller gotchas, the policies name have changed. Now you use global : instead of global dot. Additionally, the name, this is like super tiny detail, but the name of controllers and services are now lowercase. And the database plugins have changed, so you will definitely have to look at this specific documentation for the version beta 17 to beta 18. Specifically, Strapi Hook Next is gone. You can delete it. It's called Bookshelf now. And then Strapi Hook Bookshelf can be called Strapi Connector Bookshelf, and then Strapi Hook Mongoose is now called Strapi Connector Mongoose. And additionally, you're going to have to change the way your database is set up in your database.json in the config folder. But again, you're going to need to look at this specific beta 17 to beta 18 if you decide to make the jump from alpha to beta. In this case, we're at beta 20 right now. And it may be worth it for you to switch to beta 20, specifically because of the media library. In our case, I thought it wasn't, because we basically needed the bug fixes of the beta version, but we didn't necessarily need the media library, especially because that will require you to add more migration, especially to your database. So all in all, my advice in terms of the steps you want to take to migrate are to go from alpha 26 to beta, and typically you want to go to beta. I went to beta 18, 18.4. That's the best one I found that allowed me to. So I went from alpha 26.2 to beta dot git checkout beta 17 to beta 16, to beta 18.3. And the compatibility between the beta 18.3 and the plugin uploads with a custom provider was kind of itchy, so I had to downgrade the plugin upload to beta 16.4 and the upload to beta 16.4 as well. So I had to do that because we use this custom upload provider from Amazon. But you may be able to switch to beta 18.3, and from 18.3 you're probably gonna have to migrate every step manually, so you're gonna have to check the guides. But again, otherwise, if you have issue with the database, you may have to go to beta 17.4 and then go to beta 18, unless you just look at those two migration, which you can basically perform automatically. So a couple of introduction to the beta. Honestly, it just simplifies the code. It gives you a better workflow. It has a couple of gotchas, but those are okay. There are still some quirks. Something that people really dislike is the separation between the admin endpoints when compared to the front-end endpoints, because they don't trigger lifecycle callbacks, and they also have they basically only call certain controllers, or rather they use plugins controllers, so it feels counterintuitive for most users. But all in all, most of these quirks we're going to have to actually keep, especially the ones that have to do with optimization. And that's because, from what I can tell, the Strapi team is just focusing on building a multiple admin, or rather an admin backend or admin panel that uses multiple roles. So we're going to have to live with that. And that's where I would highly recommend, that's why I would highly recommend jumping to the beta version, so that then you're going to be ready to jump to these, most likely the 1.0 version, which will bring drastic changes. It will massively popularize Strapi, and it will make it so that you will actually be able to use it with a backend with people that you can share. So this is kind of has been my experience in going from alpha to beta, and I've been working with Strapi for at this point a year and a half. yeah, I guess like literally 18 months. And if you're interested in learning more about Strapi, then you can check out my Complete Strapi course, which is available on Udemy. There's probably going to be a coupon, so you can get it for like 10 bucks, but the coupon will expire, so make sure to jump on it right now and check it out immediately. And it contains guides for any question you can come up with. And if I can't answer your question, or rather if I didn't answer your question, I'm just going to answer it for you in the Q&A, and if it's interesting enough, I'll make a video about it. And there's also going to be an in-depth look at the extension system with examples, so that if you want to leverage the more effective parts of Strapi, you're going to be able to use those. Additionally, the course contains, at this point, 12 hours of projects in which we build stuff, such as an e-commerce with Gatsby, a blog with Gatsby, a landing page builder with like a portfolio builder that is based on dynamic zone and components. So it's actually really cutting edge stuff in the Strapi ecosystem. If you don't know React, it's also going to teach you React. And if you don't know Gatsby, it's also going to teach you Gatsby. So it's going to get you up to speed to work with static websites and also distributed website based in microservice-oriented fashion. So definitely check out the Complete Strapi course, link in the description. Thank you very much for watching, and have an amazing day.